a lot of people know that Tantra is slow. 10 or more years ago, the singer Sting, I think, told, some talk show host back at the time that, his lovemaking sessions would last for 4 or 5 hours. And, that could be kind of scary. That sounds, maybe a little bit intimidating to some people, but it's really about just slowing it down.
This is the Bad Girls Bible podcast. I'm your host, Sean Jameson, and this is the place where I interview experts and professionals and everyone in between to teach you how to dramatically improve your relationships and have more enjoyable sex more often. And by the way, if you want to learn my most important sex tips and techniques that will bring you and your partner back-arching, spine-tingling, toe-curling orgasms that will keep them coming back for more, you will find them in my discreet and private newsletter. Just go to badgirlsbible.com/newsletter, enter your name and email address, and I will send these sex tips straight to your inbox. Today I'm talking to Dee Dussault. Dee is a sexuality coach, Yoga Alliance certified yoga teacher, and the creator of Ganja Yoga, with a book by the same name. Since 2009, she's taught easy partner yoga, vanilla tantra, and cannabis enhanced yoga to thousands of people across the US, Canada, and Europe. Dee studied sexuality for over a decade, and she carries an honours degree in Sexuality Studies with an additional sexuality certificate. She loves inspiring others to tap into their radiant, embodied selves, and her training was in the tantric tradition of Swami Satyananda Saraswati of Bihar, India. Dee, thanks so much for coming on the show, and I hope I pronounced that Swami's name correctly.
I think you did, and I was taught if you mispronounce a Sanskrit name, you just have to say Hare Krishna, and he'll relay it to the other deities that you had the best intentions in mind.
Hare Krishna, then.
Yes. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, and I'd love to maybe start off with a little bit about your background and how you came to teach Tantra and become a sex coach.
Yeah, great. So I was studying sexuality at school, and they have an undergraduate program where you can essentially make your own major. So I decided to major in sexuality. I was always really interested in it. Even as a teenager, I would put, magazines geared toward adults on the inside of my magazine, and then the teenager magazine on the outside. So my parents wouldn't know that I was, secretly reading about things that I might have been a little bit too young to be reading about, but I've just always been quite interested in it. So I studied sexuality, and I was hoping to pursue master's study in it and become a professor, but I switched directions and became more of a coach. So I have more of working with couples or singles one-on-one, experientially versus, writing academic papers about it or teaching about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what is Tantra exactly?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's got a lot of different definitions and understanding. So I'll do my best to describe it as I understand it. When I left my academic studies to pursue my yoga teacher training, I did it in the tantric tradition. And my teacher taught us that, Tantra it's a spiritual tradition. It's a type of yoga. And it's a lot more than about sex. A lot of people know that it has something to do with sex, but it actually encompasses the whole of the human experience and considers the whole human experience to be spiritual or potentially spiritual. So sexuality is included, but so is, jealousy or anger or road rage or eating ice cream or, any experience that's sort of, an opportunity for you to become, more present, more in your senses, cultivating energy, realizing that you're alive and feeling grateful. All of that could be Tantra. So it doesn't have to include the sexual elements. But the theory is, or the idea is in Tantra, that our sexual energy is the most potent energy that we have as humans. So anger, jealousy, love, bliss, all of these other, in Tantra, it's the sexual energy that we can use to fuel, our evolution of our, consciousness to higher states. So you can use sexuality in this sort of more mindful or ritualistic way to make it a spiritual or yogic act. That's the understanding I have. But I always tell my sex coaching clients or my Tantra yoga clients that you can practice Tantra, at the dentist. If you're aware of the smells and the sounds and the experiences, the feelings, that's just as Tantra as, a partner yoga experience or a hot makeout.
Okay, so would then a good way of saying, would it be just saying that Tantra is like a mindfulness practice, maybe?
Yeah, totally. It's yeah, exactly. It's a spiritual practice. It's a type of yoga, so it has all the mindfulness of yoga, but instead of focusing on movements and postures and your body, moving through space, on your yoga mat, the way, asana or yoga practice has, tantra is, anytime and all the time. And a lot of yogis that, non-tantric yogis, regular yogis would say that yoga too is an all the time, anytime practice. And you're not supposed to just be mindful on your rubber sticky mat, but you're supposed to, practice mindfulness throughout the day. So they're very similar in that way. They're cousin practices that are about bringing, more awareness to the present moment and instead of being lost in the thoughts.
So then is it exclusively, something that's maybe a little bit, like you said, spiritual? Is it exclusively that? Or, if there's maybe, someone living in, I don't know, North Dakota and they, drive a truck, is that something they can also appreciate?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. So, if you come to it with the intention of, I want to learn Tantra, I want to come to it from the spiritual side, and I want to feel more awake and alive in, in our world and feel gratitude and these sort of spiritual feelings, that's great. But a lot of my clients actually aren't coming necessarily for spiritual purposes. They're coming for much more pragmatic ones. Maybe they've stopped finding each other, attractive, or not even stop finding each other attractive, but stop prioritizing sex. Or, maybe there's erectile dysfunction or orgasm dysfunction. So they're coming for maybe pragmatic reasons. They're not coming to evolve their consciousness and experience nirvana from the yoga standpoint, that Eastern kind of standpoint. It's a much more kind of Western or pragmatic concern. But in learning about Tantra, a lot of them are really amazed to find how, it can help their immediate sexual concern, the pragmatic concern, but that they find themselves actually becoming more drawn to and aware of those more spiritual sides. So Tantra really meets you where you're at. If you're not drawn to the spiritual, there's tons of practices that you can discard. There's no dogma. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, and you can adapt and modify the things. So it really is for everyone. It really meets you where you are. So that truck driver, if they want to learn the spiritual stuff, they can, or, that's their intention. But if that's not their intention, then there's really no judgment or dogma that you have to adopt this sort of spiritual attitude or, wear white clothing or, just sort of have, people have these fears that, the mystical will trap you and you'll have to become kind of this hippie sort of person all the time. And that's really not the case.
Well, that's good to know. So let's say someone's listening and they want to try, or they want to explore the kind of sexual aspect of Tantra. Maybe it's a female listener, maybe it's a male and female partner. And where would you advise them to start? Or is there a practice they can try out?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, Tantra allows the whole range of human emotions and experiences, including sexuality, but, it doesn't have to include sexuality. But oftentimes, that's what we're curious about, or about this, that's where people's curiosity lies. So if somebody's curious about a sort of a sexual, spiritual practice or, learning Tantra, a couple of neat things to do, whether, you have a partner or not, because you don't need a partner to do Tantra or, to have a spiritual sexuality. But a couple of things is, just, maybe in your own masturbation practice or to slow down. Just, a lot of people know that Tantra is slow. 10 or more years ago, the singer Sting, I think, told, some talk show host back at the time that, his lovemaking sessions would last for 4 or 5 hours. And, that could be kind of scary. That sounds, maybe a little bit intimidating to some people, but it's really about just slowing it down. So techniques and tips and practices aside, whatever you're already doing, to just be less oriented toward the goal and, the orgasm or the final result, and more in the present moment and all of the senses and all of the emotions that exist when you really slow down. And so choosing to slow down, whether in partnered sex or masturbation, slowing down whatever you're already doing, and also bringing awareness to the breath. That's another big piece, similar to, conventional yoga as we know it, just, watching your breath and seeing if you can slow down the breath too.
Awesome. So if someone then wants to go a little bit deeper than that, do you have any advice for them?
Totally. Yeah. So, say we're talking about someone who's masturbating, just, experiencing self-pleasure. As you start to slow down and as you slow down your breath, your capacity to feel increases. So, when we're in a panic state or stress or angry, we breathe more quickly. It's a physiological response to, the adrenaline, and we feel less. So there's less sensation and in fact, even less awareness of emotion. It's almost like we're taken by our emotion, but we're not necessarily able to hold it or be present to it. Mm-hmm. The act of slowing down the breath puts us not only more, relaxed and more in the present moment, but it actually increases, the blood flow to the sensory nerves of the body. So you feel your body more, and so slowing down your breath makes your body suddenly feel more pleasurable because you're able to actually feel it and feel those emotions more, maybe emotions that are, we might label them positive, we might label them negative, but in Tantra, they're all welcome. It's just about noticing, in the same way that in Buddhism or mindfulness, we notice what is, right? And then if you want to, kind of take it deeper beyond, slowing down and slowing down the breath, you might, if you have a partner, another really nice practice is to just spend some time without speaking, but looking into each other's eyes. And that can be kind of intimidating or weird. But again, we welcome all the human emotions, all the human experiences. So it may not always be an ecstatic, mystical lovemaking. It might feel like, oh, this is a little weird. This is a little bit edgy or outside my comfort zone. But can we breathe in that edginess? Can we breathe in that discomfort? And of course, if it's so uncomfortable that there's going to be trauma, then, stop the exercise. But if it's just mildly uncomfortable, that's often where we as humans grow. So I recommend people play at the edge of their comfort zone and, just gaze, maybe it's only 10 seconds or 20 seconds. And maybe you just breathe together. You tell your partner, I heard on this podcast that, it can kind of deepen the sense of sacredness or spirituality, or I just want to try something different. Can we look into each other's eyes, and just let maybe put a timer for 1 minute, or let's do 5 breaths, or whatever you want to agree at the beginning, or maybe it's organic. You just go as long as you want without setting a parameter. But for me, eye contact is just a really beautiful way to relate with someone beyond touch, beyond words. It's a different way. And you can do it yourself in the mirror. It might sound a little strange, but even just spending 1 or 2 or 3 minutes looking into your own eyes, your own face, observing yourself, noticing what emotions arise, what judgments or thoughts arise, and see if you can just let those go. And it's a beautiful practice in self-love. So as I said before, you definitely don't need a partner for a lot of these things.
That is fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Dee.
Oh, for sure. No problem. I love helping people to, relax and feel good. And I had the luxury of not having a lot of sort of sexual baggage, from my childhood or my family of origin, or, I don't have a religion that's been oppressive to my sexuality. So I just lucked out that I got kind of a head start that, not a lot of things are taboo for me. So I want everyone else to feel as open and expressed and as joyful in their sex lives and in their lives in general as I'm able to feel.
Absolutely. So you're also a yogi, and yoga is a great way, to work on both your mind and your body. And I'd love if maybe you could talk a little bit about how certain aspects of yoga can greatly enhance, someone's sex life.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. So, Tantra aside, this we call Tantra, just for a quick shorthand, the yoga of sex. We know now it's more than sex, but a quick shorthand. And then the other yoga that, in studios is more of the yoga of, just the mind-body connection, but it doesn't usually focus on sexuality at all or mention sexuality at all. But if you do a Google search of yoga and orgasm or yoga and sex, there's more and more stories coming out specifically of women having orgasms or at least getting very turned on at a regular yoga class. So not a Tantra class or, but just the act of relaxing, like I said, breathing more slowly, letting the blood flow through, especially if you sit a lot, there's a lot of stagnation in the hips and pelvis, right at the genitals. So you're, stagnant blood, you're not getting circulation, the lymph is not leaving. If you, most of us sit too much. So movement and stretching, especially through the legs and pelvis, getting blood flow in. Women are definitely reporting, feeling turned on. Some are even reporting orgasms at the class, or, something like, we can even talk about what an orgasm is or the definition of an orgasm, but orgasm-like experiences or orgasmic experiences at classes. So I think it's the combination of the blood flow, the circulation, the slower breath, and just, sort of moving in general and of course, relaxing. So a lot of my clients find, if they're coming to me because they're not prioritizing sex, I do recommend that they go to yoga, or at least one of them go to yoga. So especially women who, in our culture where, we have equality and women are working now too, and that's, great. It's quite masculine though to be out in the world. If you think of not what kind of genitals you have, but more just the yin and the yang of if everything in life has an element of masculinity or activeness and an element of femininity. Our culture in general is not encouraging anyone really that feminine, and so it could be argued that women need to tap into that feminine, which, resting, spending time with other women or in community or with, family or children or self-care, taking a bath. These are all kind of feminine. And, I'm a feminist and I don't believe in just two genders. We're very postmodern now so I'm using these words, not to mean biological gender.
Mm-hmm.
Someone could be trans but just the gender
or a
oriented
non-binary version.
Yeah, non-binary, exactly. So I'm very careful not that I don't want to perpetuate a binary that doesn't work for people. But if we're all on a spectrum, the idea is that the yin or the feminine side of the spectrum is being undervalued in our culture, and we all would benefit from tapping into it more. And traditionally, the yin has been considered, community and the body versus the mind. So spending time with others and spending time moving, dance, art, these are considered, feminine in that use of the word, or yin. And so because women are working so much, a lot of my women clients are finding that they're not turned on anymore. They're disconnected from their bodies. And it's happening with men too, for sure. Don't get me wrong. But I recommend that these clients go to yoga as a way to tap into their libido in a sort of non-direct way that it's sort of a happy byproduct.
You mentioned discussing what an orgasm is, and I'd love to come back to that if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. So as you get practicing with Tantra and, playing with some of the different breathing and not only slowing down your breath, but, noticing as you are perhaps masturbating or having sex, where, how your breath changes. And for most of us, as we get more aroused, our breathing rate will increase. And as we approach orgasm, some of us might hold our breath to kind of build more tension. Mm-hmm. Some Tantra practices, although it's about building sexual energy or having, a free, expressive sex life, some Tantra practices intentionally delay orgasm, that orgasmic release, or some practices, don't even go to the orgasm. And I'm talking about, what we all know as an orgasm, the genital, the standard orgasm. Some practices instead want to hold that energy in and move it out of the genitals and more through the whole body. So believe it or not, you can feel as much pleasure through the rest of your body, or maybe it's your other erogenous zones, or maybe it's things you didn't even know were turn-on places, like, maybe your heart chakra or something. But through the power of breathing and visualizing, you might be able to pull that sort of genital energy, that blood flow, that tension or that arousal feeling up into your heart. And with, kind of visualization and different kinds of breath, you might experience an orgasm from your heart. And so, it may not feel exactly like a genital orgasm, which is based for the most part, for most of us, on like a friction and tension, but it will feel definitely like the way a sneeze has a buildup and mm-hmm. a peak and a sense of release. And a sneeze is a reflex. You can't force a sneeze. And a sneeze is very pleasurable. So I would say a sneeze is, to me, a form of orgasm. It's a non-genital orgasm, non-sexual. You can have similar type experiences through your whole body that are much more pleasurable than a sneeze, much more akin to what we think of as orgasms. So I call them orgasms, but sometimes there's no genital touch involved at all. And yet the person feels like that sneeze feeling where it's built up and I'm going over the edge now, and there's this definite release. So to me, that if an orgasm is a pleasurable reflex, these are energy orgasms, and they feel ecstatic and wonderful and different from genital orgasms. And the idea in Tantra, in my own personal experience, is that they're very healing, because this kind of different types of breath work change the carbon dioxide and oxygen ratio in your brain. It actually does produce an altered state or an alternate state. So similar to psychedelics or ecstatic dance, where you might dance until you're kind of in an altered state. This type of breath work, tantric breath work or holotropic breath work, is a similar type of practice. These produce altered states that are at once, you're very aroused, but because it has that yoga and mindfulness element, and because you're moving slowly, it also has a lot of relaxation. So usually arousal and relaxation are on opposite sides of the spectrum, but in tantric sex, we're actually bridging them and having them at the same time. So it can feel pretty different for people who are, more used to that, in porn, for example. The sexual arousal constantly builds. There's never a dip or fluctuation, and then it goes to the orgasm and it's done. So that's how many of us think of sex, or how sex should be. So in Tantra, there's much more of this wave of, okay, for these moments, I'm building towards something, and now I'm kind of spreading it out, and it's less concentrate, more diffuse, and it's less of that masculine arrow, where I have a goal, I want to go to the ultimate pleasure, and more of that feminine and, oceanic, and it's just the pleasures everywhere. I don't have to feel it just in my, genitals. So kind of that interplay of, again, the masculine and feminine, polarities.
I love that perspective.
Yay! Yeah, no, it's great, and it's great for people. I have some aging clients, older clients who have some guys who have trouble maintaining and achieving erections as they age, and of course having good cardiovascular health and a low stress life is important, and to look at those things too. But if those are taken care of, and there's still for whatever reason difficulty there, Tantra is great because it relies so much less on genitals and more on the whole body, that you don't really need an erect penis to have sex. You could make love to your partner or make love to yourself in different ways. So you get to rewrite sexuality, despite a body that might be aging that, isn't able to have conventional sex. So it's really great for that population.
I'd love to come back to yoga for a second. And I'm just wondering, would you have any advice on maybe yoga positions or even just exercises in general that would help strengthen the pelvic floor and Kegel muscles?
Yeah, totally. So just before I get into the yoga poses, I'll do a quick aside about Kegels or Kegels. I do teach them, because especially, they can help bring blood flow to the genitals of both genders and produce stronger orgasms because the muscle's stronger. So its contractive reflex will be stronger when you orgasm. So I'm all for them, and they're great for women after giving birth and stuff. But the issue that's arising is that people are over strengthening those sets of muscles without stretching them. So in many ways, you could think of the bodybuilder who's doing a ton of bicep curls, and he's always contracting and shortening that muscle, but he never stretches it.
I totally understand.
In the same way, constantly putting tension of that type, contractive tension on the pelvic floor, can actually pull your whole sacrum out of alignment. It can do a lot of damage in terms of having organs prolapse, potentially into other places, things that you really want to avoid. But at the very least, kind of changing the tilt of the pelvis in a negative way that can cause, compression in your vertebral discs. So only Kegeling without stretching could be worse than not Kegeling at all. So when I teach the Kegel, or I say Kegel, you might say Kegel. When I teach it, I always teach that you not only do you squeeze, like for both genders, we all have pelvic floors. Squeezing, like you might stop the flow of urine, or for women, I sometimes say, imagine you have a juicy ripe plum inside, and you're going to squeeze that plum and squish it. But then when you're done that contraction, to push out. And you might do it right now while you're listening to the podcast, to push out. I'm just going to say it like you were pushing out a bowel movement. Like honestly, like that extending, that pushing, just so that you're pulling and pushing those muscles equally, and you're doing your weight training and your yoga kind of equally, you're stretching equally. So that's just my aside about Kegels or Kegels. So that's one great way to bring awareness to your genitals, and you can do it at the office. We are so on our screens and our devices that we can kind of forget that we have bodies or that we're animals. So no wonder people are having less sex or not prioritizing it. In the country of Japan, sex has gone way down. People are really not prioritizing it. And I fear that that's happening in our culture too. So just remembering that we're animals and that we're mammals and that sex feels good, and, to shed as much, shame around sex and to enjoy that animal part of ourselves is important. So Kegels are great because they kind of remind us anytime in any place, like, oh, I have all these nerve endings. I can get some pleasure right here, right now. And pleasure is our birthright. And so especially if you're stretching them afterwards, that's, and pushing out as much as you pull in. So that's one piece. And then any yoga stretch or posture that, brings blood flow into the hips and pelvis is going to be useful. Truly any movement or posture is useful to me. One of my favorites that, is available to all levels, because to me, a big part of my yoga teaching and philosophy is that it's not just for the, elite dancer body, but, for all bodies. You could do it sitting on a chair. You don't need a yoga mat. But you just cross, say your right ankle over your left knee. So you look like you're making a kind of a triangle or a number 4 shape with your legs. And for many people, the stretch is already present. That's all you have to do, because we are pretty tight in our hips. And for those that don't feel much from, having their ankle not on the opposite knee, but just beyond it, so it's like past it. If you want a little more stretch, flex the top ankle and then push down on the top knee. And those two things together will bring even more stretch. And so again, you could do this on the bus or at your work, or, waiting for the menu at the restaurant. A quick stretch. Obviously, the more time and intention and mindfulness you put in, the more result you'll get. But you really can do this while watching TV or whatever. And it's, just a really easy way to bring blood flow into the hips. I'm trying to think of something that people can do anytime, anywhere, if they don't have the opportunity to go to yoga. But any movement at all that brings blood flow in is going to be helpful sexually.
Awesome. So I know you're the inventor of Ganja Yoga. And just before we talk about that, I'm wondering if you have any advice or any thoughts on using cannabis, on using, marijuana, weed to try and improve sex where it's legal. Do you have any advice on that?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, of course, where it's legal. I always recommend people start low, if they're newer to cannabis or if they're new to using it in a sexual way or with a partner. It never hurts to have too little. The worst case is that, oh, that was kind of boring. I didn't feel anything. That's not that bad a worst case. The worst case of doing too much is that you might overconsume. I try not to use the phrase overdose because it implies something quite fatal or serious. You can't die from taking too much cannabis. So it sometimes can feel like you might die, though. It feels really bad to overconsume. So I recommend just starting low, starting slow, and you can always add more. So yeah, that's my first, I think even most important thing is just to start slow. And then there's so many different methods of consumption nowadays and strains and types of, flavoring and product and dosing. You could do a lot of research online to find something that you're drawn to. You could get really granular and knowledgeable, or you could just kind of explore with like what's already in your world or what you're already kind of curious about. Is it vaping or is it smoking? They all have pros and cons. So it's like whatever you're most drawn to might be the good place to start. And you might want to explore it in a sexual way by yourself before bringing a partner in. So, for masturbation or taking a bath or doing your own yoga, or just kind of like, how does this cannabis work on me when I'm, exploring my sexuality or exploring my body on my own? If you're very comfortable with it and very comfortable with your partner, there's no harm in integrating them all together. But if it's kind of new, it doesn't hurt to be alone, just at that first time, unless if it feels better to have somebody there, then of course do that then. And so, yeah, it's just sort of, it's such a individualized experience with cannabis, like how much and how often and like at what points during the lovemaking. So it's hard to give tips.
Okay. And then what about Ganja Yoga? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, as the name implies, cannabis-enhanced yoga, and it's for all bodies and all levels of experience with yoga. So I get a lot of beginners to yoga who are maybe already are curious about the cannabis or already use it. So, but I also get a lot of people who are new to cannabis. So I kind of get people on both sides of that spectrum, already do yoga new to cannabis or already do cannabis new to yoga. And sometimes I get, of course, people who've done both already, but we do get quite a bit of that new energy. And in part because the classes are marketed specifically, like I said before, to be for all bodies, sizes, and ages. So it's really a relaxation-based yoga. It's not headstands and handstands and stuff you'd see on a magazine cover. It really is just to relax and feel good and chill out. And the cool thing is we spend the first 30 minutes before the class starts getting high together. So it has this community element that isn't present at most yoga studios. Usually, studio culture is that you finish your practice and you roll your mat up and leave because the next class is coming in and there's not really a lot of opportunity to get to know people. But we have this really leisurely experience where it's more than just a yoga class. There's time before to get high, and then there's even time afterwards. So if, say, you overconsumed and you just need a little time to gather yourself before, hopefully getting on public transit and not driving, or, you want to get to know your fellow yogi, there's this time after too to integrate and have fun. So it really is as much about the community as it is about the ganja. And, of course, the relaxing yoga, the three of those together, not one, is stronger than the other. So I've been doing, sex coaching and Tantra work for as long as I've been doing Ganja Yoga. This June will be my 10-year anniversary of the whole thing. So it's an exciting year.
Awesome. Dee, this has been fantastic. I'm just wondering, if someone wants to find out more about you, maybe get in touch to find out more about Tantra or your sex coaching, what's the best place for people to reach you at?
Oh, yeah. So probably my website's the best place, and it's my name, which is not easy to spell. So Dee is my first name, D-E-E, and then my last name, D-U-S-S. So that's S as in Sam, A-U-L-T. So Dussault, but it's spelled like Dussault, that kind of strange way, French-Canadian. So my website, deedussault.com, is a good place to find me, or I'm Ganja Yoga on Instagram. So that's also a good place to find me. I post every day, and I'm often putting tips and, just little weirdo things to keep people inspired. So I have a lot of fun with that account.
Awesome. I'll include all those links in the show notes.
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, I'll be going to Jamaica this April. So if any of your listeners want to join me there for 420, 420 is the big stoner celebration, April 20th. So no better place to go but Jamaica.
For sure. Dee, thanks so much for coming on the show.
My ultimate pleasure. Thank you so much, Sean.
And by the way, if you want to learn my most important sex tips and techniques that will bring you and your partner back arching, spine tingling, toe curling orgasms that will keep them coming back for more, you'll find them in my discreet and private newsletter. Just go to badgirlsbible.com/newsletter, enter your name and email address, and I will send these sex tips straight to your inbox.